Sorry about that. I think we've been blinded, so I thought it might be prudent not to have our eyes closed for the session. So, listen, thank you for your time today. I think we've heard some really resonant words from some of our guest speakers, and what struck me this morning was just a couple of statements around digital trust, and we heard about what really is important in our environments and our infrastructure, and we heard about how do we manage risk. And I'm joined by a very esteemed panel of speakers and fellow security professionals, just to give you really a sense of some of the things we're seeing, some of the challenges we're facing, both as vendors, suppliers, and obviously as end users. And really, it's probably most topical. We've seen today the outbreak of more ransomware leading to availability, resiliency issues in critical infrastructure in the Ukraine, in Russia. There's not a day goes by that we don't pick up a paper or we look on the internet and we see that someone else has been breached and data is exploited. And if we look in financial services specifically, we look at 2016, where by some margin, financial services was the most attacked industry in the marketplace. And for those systems that IBM were monitoring globally, we saw a 65% increase in attacks, largely in the banking industry and insurance. So this is not a new problem, and sadly it's something that seems to be getting worse as we progress. Now, IBM, amongst others, invests money with the likes of Ponemon and different research organizations to get a sense of data breach and data exploits globally. And if we look at 2016, we saw in India specifically that the average cost of a data exploit has gone up by about 16%. We see that the average time to detection of major exploits is increasing and was around 160 to 170 days. So if we bring these things into sharp focus, the landscape has changed significantly over the last 12 to 18 months in our financial industry. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about three things that we should be focusing on, and then I'm going to open up to the panel and ask just 2 or 3 questions to get the guys talking about what they're seeing and their views and opinions on how we move forward in making sure the bad guys don't win. So I was with a group of CISOs last week in Southeast Asia, and we were talking about 3 things that we were worried and focused on to make sure we accelerate our overall security posture in the infrastructure. And we started really with the basics. Now, the basics are as simple as, do we know what we have deployed where? Do we know the level of compliance of our applications and our infrastructure? And are we able to patch adequately, appropriately, and timely to reduce the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure? And most of the time, the answer is probably no. Now, this gives the bad guys, obviously, the easy way in to taking advantage and exploiting our data. So something as simple as the basics can really drive a significant risk reduction in our environments. The second thing we spoke about was I subscribe, as we all do, to a number of security blogs, a number of security white papers. And on average, we look at about 60,000 new blogs being published monthly with largely relevant and important information. But how do we keep up with that level of information? How do we make sure we take out of that actionable items so we can improve our environment and reduce our risk? And the answer quite simply is we can't. So clients are, and also suppliers, are actively looking at cognitive technology and solutions as a way of both augmenting the productivity of our individuals, but also, where appropriate, driving more orchestration and automation into our environments. So there's a lot of focus, there's a lot of desire to adopt some of these new technologies, but also a measure of patience to make sure we see a return on some of those investments. And then the final thing we spoke about was response. most organizations will suffer some form of incident. How do they respond? How prepared are they to respond? Do they have the right skills to do the triage, to do the investigations necessary to either come up with a viable root cause analysis or to very clearly bring attribution to a specific incident? And this is an area where I think most organizations are focusing, and the panel will no doubt cover. But it's something that we're all wrestling with as a means to make sure we get the right people in front of an incident, because the data tells us, and it's probably quite logical, the longer we leave it in terms of responding to an incident, the more that incident will cost us, both financially, whether it's a case of fraud, or in terms of reputation, if it's availability to our infrastructure. So I'll pause there, and then I'll probably start with Srikanta. And really, I've given you some idea of my observations over the last 12 to 18 months. Why don't you share with us some of the things you're seeing and how you've seen the landscape change, Srikanta?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Before I start, I just want to share an example to get the context. So I was in a bank yesterday, right? To cancel my mortgage deed for a loan that I'd taken. And I spent around 2 hours in the bank to get this done. Very efficient team, because I had cleared my loan more than 2 years ago, and yesterday I'd gone to cancel the deed. So they were very helpful. Then when I was sitting there, I realized, when was the last time I spent 2 hours in a bank? And then I realized that it was when I went to the bank to take a loan. So what it means is, today, especially in the banking industry or elsewhere, the way we work, the way we live, the way we consume, information and, disseminate information has changed big time. Another example is about, the work we do. I think Arindam, my colleague in the morning, was talking about, how, the boundaries are no more there. When I started my career, work was something that I woke up in the morning, drove down, and switched on my laptop or PC and started the work. So work was somewhere that you went to do. But today, work is a function. It doesn't matter where you are physically. The first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is look at our smartphones, and we start working. So this is the landscape change, and it's being driven by business. It's not by technology. Businesses have changed the way they are conducted. A lot of disruptions have brought in these changes, and that has brought in a change in the security approach, and also the way organizations look at security, right? So the traditional way of defining a boundary and securing the perimeter is no more valid, and it won't be sufficient anymore. So across all industries, and even in our lives, security has changed. The way we live and consume information has changed. So I see it at that way, and that brings in its own set of challenges, and I would like to understand from my co-panelists, how they're viewing this, and how are they treating it.
Thanks, Srikanta. So Avez, over to you. I mean, in the insurance industry, we've seen recently a number of high-profile breaches within Asia-Pacific specifically. Tell me how you've seen the changes over the last 12 or so months.
A very good afternoon to everyone. Just to put it on a lighter note, the topic cyber and crime. In the past, crime was like theft, burglary, and looting and all those things. But thankfully to the new technology and the new toy for the hackers, the emerging trend goes back to what we call it as hack. But hack is nothing new. Being Indians, I think for us, hack and firewall is as old as, say, some 7,000 years back, where we have seen the first firewall, guys. Ramayana, right? Are you guys connecting with me? We are aware about the first firewall. We have a copyright as Indians. How does the firewall breach happen? How does the hack happen? Ravan never came as Ravan. He came as a sadhu, right? And what he did, he touched on a very, very weakest link, the human link, right? So still today, there are three things that sells in a hacker's community. There are three things that sells. Number three is, I guess, greed. Number two is curiosity. In Ramayana, there was a curiosity for the golden deer, right? And number one, any guess what sells in the hackers community as the number one tool to hack you guys? Sorry?
Human.
Fear of God. शिरडी के साई बाबा 5 लोगों को send करो या फिर 5 years of bad luck, right? It still sells. Be a man married for 5 years or 25 years. If he gets a matrimonial profile in his inbox, he's a married person, right? A man's get that I am Avez, for example, and I get a mail saying, Dear Rahul, as discussed on shadi.com, these are my 4 photos. Kindly have a look and let me know your opinion. I am married. What will I do? Will I download it? What am I downloading? I am downloading keyloggers, right? So I think the hackers, they are fully armed. So are the companies, right? The companies are completely armed. The hackers are completely armed. Whom shall they exploit now? The weakest link. If you talk about, I was just reading the Cisco report, the media report, and they said ransomware is the biggest threat for for the year 17. How does ransomware happen? Ransomware is nothing but an organized crime. They are recruiting people. They are recruiting organizers. Criminals are having, like we have heard about SaaS. You have heard about SaaS? Software as solutions, as services, infrastructure as services. Now the new term is there, ransomware as services. They have operators. Those operators will send in you mails. You get phished. And this is my, as a CISO for a general insurance company, I completely believe that data is a phenomena for me, right? It's the new natural resource for India because America is the master of softwares, China is the master of hardware. We are masters of what? Data. Close to around 134 crore people using, I guess, close to around 40% of the users use smartphone. But are we smart enough to use the smartphone? We say there is an Intel inside, but what about the person outside? So the whole objective, when we started connecting our dots about security, as a company or as a group, we thought that we are fairly secured. We are fairly secured, but what about my weakest link? So in the last 2 years, what our emphasis was being data as our key leverager. We leverage on data, right? It's a resource for us. And if we don't secure data, I don't have anything to lose. As an insurer, what is my product? My product is my data. If somebody goes out and sell my data, nobody's going to buy it. So what is my fear? My fear is, what if I myself don't get my data? Are you getting me? What if I myself don't get my data? Diwali vacation, 4 days, all men were at home. How do you feel if your phones are in your wife's hand for an hour or 2 hours? Right? There's nothing inside the phone. But you will have a trauma running, adrenal rush in your whole body, that my data, there's nothing wrong, but still we want our data to be our data. So I think as a company, we have driven an agenda, but the challenge was, how do we train a 7,000 base of employees, right? How do we scale this training? So scalability of awareness was one of the agenda, one of the challenge we faced. Second was vector. How do I tell my employee that these are the various vectors? I have office in Mumbai, I have office in the interior of the country as well. There, how do people doesn't even know what is phishing, right? Ransomware, thanks to ransomware, the country is much more aware about what has to be done going forward, right? I think before a year back, we were never so proactive on putting updates, patches on time, right? So what ransomware or WannaCry gave us is more, they made us more reactive, yeah. Right? But the whole challenge is to be more proactive. So what we are doing is we are creating artificial simulations internally within the organization. We are sending our employees the various vectors through which they can get exploited. And we are seeing whether they are responding on time or not. If there is an incident, as per the report, 40% of the incident never get reported. How will you manage those incidents then? And what logical algorithms will build up, and what will we do in our internal systems? So my whole take was to make the human factor, the human layer, or to make the human firewall more stronger within the organization.
No, thank you, Avez. And I think we'd all agree, insider threat is still the largest vector we have, and sometimes through accident, but largely through people manipulating some of our more privileged users. And I think one of the key lessons to call out there is, or the key principles is, I was recently at a presentation with Kevin Mandian, and we talked about just tracking user behavior, endpoint behavior is quickly becoming one of the best ways to gather control and visibility around what those users and all those 7,000 people are doing. I think that's something to think about. What are we doing as organizations to improve that? The fascinating insight into your paranoia of your wife holding your phone is something I'll take with me. I'm not sure I feel so paranoid, but thank you for that. Manoj, thank you for being here today. Why don't you share with us just some of your insights into the changing landscape as well, please?
Yeah, I'll take the discussion in a different way. Like, okay, means we have been hearing, and also Avez has told that, data is the most important thing for all the financial service sector. And also in the morning we have heard that data is oil. And for a life insurance industry, also data is oil. And if you compare between a life insurance industry and a banking industry, if you open a bank account and if you close the bank account, probably the banking organization has to store your data up to 7 years as per the RBI regulations. However, if you see and if you understand the life insurance industry and the way they function, it is a long-term contract between the organization like life insurance company and the customers. We take the life insurance policies for 20 years or 30 years. So the customer trusts the company that his or her data should be stored in the company in a secure manner for that longer term. And even if the claim is settled after 30 years or after 25 years, there is also another 7 years for which, as per the regulation, the data has to be stored in a secure manner by the company. So if you see what are the threats that nowadays the BFSI sector has been facing, and with particular to the life insurance sector, I will say the most important threat is the data loss through various means, either through the weakest link like pseudo stealing through the humans, or through hacking, or through any other means. And what kind of data? It is most important is the unencrypted data is flowing around the company, flowing outside the company, flowing with the partners like agents, corporate brokers, and so many places the data is there, the customer data is there. And the second, we can say, we have been also hearing, yes, ransomware and malware attacks which has been happening. Also yesterday also we have heard about another ransomware. That is also a second aspect. And combining the ransomware and malware with the phishing. So how the ransomware and malware introduced into a system of the organizations. Of course, the most important thing or most easiest thing is through the phishing or spoofing. And in fact, a recent study by the anti-phishing working group has shown that during last 1 year there is a increase of 500% in the phishing attack in the worldwide, and the 20% of attack is towards to the financial sector companies. Yeah. And the another thing, another aspect also, if you look at the threat wise, the insecure third parties. So if you understand that most of the organizations has been outsourcing their important business processes to the third parties or to the outsourcing vendors. So you take the banks like check printing, or you take the insurance companies like policy printing, and whatever the policy bonds we guys are receiving, those are coming from the third parties. So lots of data are being handled by the third parties. So whatever the security controls the companies has been practicing, the same security control, while the same level of security control need to be practiced by the third parties also. Yeah. And also, if you check the speed of technology or the changes in the technology, so many new technology has been comes to the market. We talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, mobile technologies. It is also gives an opportunities not only to the companies, also it is giving an opportunities to the hackers. Hackers also use these new technologies to hack to the companies. And considering the threats and mitigating measures, if we also look at the challenges that the companies are facing nowadays, like any company like banking, insurance, or non-banking financial services, we all heard about that how many regulations has come during just last few months. If you take just last 7 to 8 months, RBI has issued regulations for the banks, for the non-banking financial services. IRDA has issued regulations for the insurance companies. Aadhaar has issued so many regulations for the companies who are using e-sign or who are using the KYC through the Aadhaar platforms. So regulation is one of the challenges. So implementing the security practices and also complying with the regulations, so both has to be balanced by the companies. And inside the company also, the security organizations as well as IT organizations has been facing lots of challenges. Like if we say that many departments are working in silos. So collaborating all the departments or collaborating all the users for the innovation in the security practices is becoming more difficult. Yeah. We all know that there are three pillars: people, process and technology. Unless these pillars works in a collaborative manner, the security, following the security practices, I mean good security practices will be a very difficult thing for the organization.
Yeah, no, thank you, Manoj. I think you raised a number of interesting points, from data, where is it? Have I classified it? Do I know how important it is? I think there was a comment made in one of the presentations earlier around, do I know what is essential for my business? And I think you highlight very clearly that data is your business. And if you don't have the right controls around that, then your business is at risk. And we've seen that recently. You made an excellent point around the thirst and appetite for new technology. You know, we are seeing an unprecedented acceleration of complexity and functionality in some of our security technologies. You know, are we able to keep up with those from a human resources perspective? Do we have the right people to leverage some of that technology for the betterment of our organizations? And then you finished really with an excellent point around the supply chain of an organization, the collaboration. You know, are departments working in the right way to quickly close risk, to quickly address incidents and remediation? And largely we see, you know, particularly in times of incident response, we see a panic on who's accountable, who looks after that application, who looks after that device on the network infrastructure. We see a lack of clarity that drives a longer time to remediation and closure. So thank you, Manoj, some excellent insights.
Paul, sorry, just to add a point. When we discussed about the incident response, how about creating an artificial incident, right? And trying to understand the response, how internally the crisis management team worked. So we thought of, we did a tabletop exercise wherein we created artificial incidents. And let us understand then how the behavior is expected from different people and what should be the, otherwise, as you rightly said, when there is an incident, there's a complete panic.
How did you find that, the tabletop exercise? Because I think there's a mixed view on, you know, can that be a productive exercise versus there is right now we see a lot of interest in simulated exercises using cyber ranges and different types of technology.
So initially we had a tabletop exercise, and the next phase we are planning for a simulation.
Yeah.
So we are in talks with providers wherein we'll be doing simulations. But the first step is the management is not a technical management, right? The team who's supposed to be a part of the crisis management team, they need not be completely techies. You are aware, right? The CISO need not be aware about the technicalities. The first hand need to be given on the basic with the tabletop exercise.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think the basic is tabletop, then we are running for a simulation.
No, thank you. So Shiv, coming to you, I think we're hearing some excellent input from the guys. What about your takes? I mean, clearly you're dealing with a high-pressure environment, a great deal of throughput. Availability is key. So tell us some of the things you've been seeing.
Yeah, you are right. Availability, performance, and integrity of data is very important for us. And being a critical infrastructure, we are always in the target attack. See, as you said, people, process, and technology, all the 3 points are very important. But looking, you know, this time, scale, and accuracy, I think we need to deploy some advanced tool also, where, you know, those things can be done by, you know, your machine learning tools and other stuff. So just to give our example, we have, you know, more, I think, per day 300 GB data. We have more than 2 lakh terminals, and $300 million, 300 million orders per day we are covering. So covering these much large of data, we have deployed very sophisticated tools like machine learnings, cognitive technologies, SIMs, where the L1 level kind of job is, we taken out, and we are more focused on, they are more focused on the strategic parts. Coming to, we have deployed now these tools. So coming to this tabletop exercise, we are doing a simulation testing for this tool also, whether these tools are working with their capacity levels or not. First on the tool levels, and then we are doing the exercise on the complete, taking a scenarios, for these kind of attack, and we are doing a complete crisis management to find out how much we are prepared to tackle these kind of attacks or not.
What sorts of things did you see in the crisis management simulations? Because what I've seen from experience is if the roles and responsibilities aren't well defined, and typically security isn't responsible for making changes in the infrastructure, and sometimes those changes are critical to resolution of a specific incident. So what types of things, I mean, maybe start with you, Avez, you've done the recent exercise, but did you notice gaps between what a network analyst might do or a sysadmin, or did you see any gaps on that side?
We saw a lot of gaps, and that's why we did that exercise, because there was a panic. Who shall be responsible for reporting an incident to the regulator, or who will go to the media, or how the things will happen? Who will first, raise the flag? Internally, who will be coordinating amongst different people? What will be the role of the IT head? What will be the role of the CIO? What will be the role of the marketing head? What will be the role of the compliance and legal department head? So nobody wants to enter into it when there's a crisis, to be very honest. Yeah. So there has to be a very clear and crispy definition of crisis management and who is expected to do what. So Absolutely. I think we initially had those gaps, and we then, when the regulator came up with the requirement of having a crisis management policy, we very clearly defined the roles and responsibilities, and basis those responsibilities, we educated our team. This is what you are expected to do, and these are the challenges. You come up with your challenges so that we can further fill up the gaps, and then we did the first tabletop.
Yeah, perfect. And
Shiv? These type of exercise will also help us, to increase our maturity levels. You need to keep on improving your process, your, the other practices, depending upon your learning and other stuff. The next part is about the technology. You also keep on testing your technologies, whether the OEM or your SI partner provided with some capacity or not, whether they are performing up to the mark or not. I'll give the examples. We have done the lots of simulation like DDoS or malware or ransomware. Either our detection tool is working or not. Are they able to detecting or not? Maybe a DDoS, we keep on doing a testing whether they are performing what they are supposed to be perform or not. So it's from all the angles, people, process, and technology.
No, I agree. And often we deploy a solution or a service, and we think that the risk is reduced or resolved, and that ongoing testing and simulation is critical.
Yeah, some of the learning I can give is here, because we have taken a very good tools, but if they are not configured properly, and while doing a simulation test only, we will come to know that this point was missing, because of that is not work. Because some minor mistake or minor configuration, these things got not triggered. So you will come to know all those things at the time of the simulation only.
I agree. So if we, Manoj, you have a view?
Yeah, just I want to add a point. Like, yes, all the regulations has come up with the, that all the organizations should have a cyber crisis management plan. And everybody earlier was having an incident management procedures, but most of the things was on paper. So the most important thing also is that paper has to be brought to the table of the end user. So which is the most effective way probably is the continuous training and this kind of simulations. So if you take just a simple example, all of us has implemented the SIM or syslog. However, have we tested if in case there is an incident, is the logs or the SIM which are the storing logs, does that solution has the capability for a forensic audit? If you have an incident and if you require to do a forensic audit, whether the logs will be useful.
Yeah.
So this is just one of the examples.
I agree, Manoj. I mean, we're talking about one of the barriers, really, one of the challenges we face to reducing our risk. What else have we seen in terms of some of those barriers? You know, people will talk about support from the board, or challenges internally around transformation of infrastructure. Maybe if you just give me a sense. Maybe start with Srikanta. What have you seen in terms of some of those challenges organizations have faced?
See, challenges that at least we see, from a vendor perspective is one about, as Mr. Manoj said, the sweating of the equipment, right? So to take an example of SOC operations, I think most of us here know what is a SOC, and I think we have a mature SOC going on. But how much of it is, helping our cause today? So the common, understanding of a SOC is about, buy a SIM and, throw in a ticketing system and you're up and running. But is the SOC delivering its value? Is it covering the entire scope that it was initially supposed to? Are we able to detect and remediate incidents, within time? So the barriers that I see, is about getting the right configuration and the right set of rules which are customized to the existing deployment. I think that's where the industry has to really help the customers. When I say industry, the vendors and the partners together, because a customer is buying a solution, he's not buying an equipment. He's trying to buy a solution for his problem.
Agreed.
Now, are we solving the problem? Are the best practices that are there in the industry being transferred to the customers? That's somewhere, we still have a lot of ground to cover. And most of the customers also are now realizing that after having invested into such, complex solutions, it is not really delivering value to them.
Testing, and Shiv made the point, the challenge of that environment, that infrastructure is key.
I just like to add upon the SOC part. Now SOC is not just as a SIM today. So we looking today's threat vectors, it's so much sophisticated that we are moving from traditional SOC to the next gen SOCs, like using more proactive approach or a cyber resilience, how quickly you can respond to incident, or maybe a online or real-time threat monitoring and other stuff. Not only in SIM, on top of the SIM, security analytics, and bad user behavior analysis, or maybe a machine learning and cognitive technology where you can learn structured and unstructured data both and provide how quickly you can respond to incident. Otherwise, looking from for us, what kind of scenario we cannot wait, for a day or so. It's all about quickly how you can respond it.
No, I agree. So just on that point, though, the game changers, the new technologies, the next generation security operations centers, what is it that you are thinking about that's going to change the game for you in your organization? So if you look at where you are today and you look at what you're planning for the future, what do you see as the real, value from vendors, from suppliers, from collaborations? What is it you think will make a big difference to your organization? Maybe start with you, Avez.
From the industry where I come from, I see a very big friendly fire, a friendly fire which can trigger any time, which are my vendors, for an example. We have dealers, agents, brokers, hospitals who are handling our cashless claims. So this friendly fire, Games of Thrones is an example, Equifax is an example. What happened exactly is, everything was secured within the company, but what about the friendly fire who gets integrated with your company? How well is they protected? Are you really looking for it? Like most of the companies here must be doing system audit, right? System audits we do from an auditor, but there is no regulation for that auditor to do his own system audit. How does his audit reports are protected? Deloitte is an example, right? Wherein a lot of customers' confidential data went out. If my system audit reports goes to an hacker's hand, right? He need not hack into me because I have the best of the technology, but he gets to know ready to available information from a very less managed. So I think culture has to be there, not only within the companies, but all the stakeholders the company is exposed to.
So how do you...
So just to add on this, anyway, we need to do the third-party assessment. But whenever you're doing an audit or this kind of stuff, make sure that your data and your report should be on your premises only. We never allow any third party, whether anybody, to take the data or take the report also outside, because it is very critical for us. But only regulators we keep on sharing.
We are talking about the masses, like companies, definitely companies, big size companies do follow hygiene, but when we are talking in general, India, see, after before demonetization, we were a population, unbanked population would make a country which is the 7th largest country, for an example. Such a huge unbanked population we had. I think fundamentally as a country, when we are driving this space of cyber and internet, we need a fundamental change in terms of culture.
No, I agree. And to Shiv's point, I think the supply chain you would have and the rigor you have around your supply chain wouldn't necessarily be the focus and rigor that a life insurer would have or a general insurer. And yet we're starting to see that being absolutely necessary to reduce those risks. You know, many organizations I speak to cannot tell you who their list of suppliers are. They can't tell you with certainty who's accessing what resources, you know, what rights that IDs have, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we are seeing a change there in terms of supply chain is critical, both for a client's ability to compete, but also a potential and huge risk vector, as you say, friendly fire in terms of access to data.
I just had one point to add, to what was discussing about your partners accessing your infrastructure and they being the vector, for any attack against you. The best example that we can think of is the Target hack, right? So I was in Target, working for them, handling some of the compliance. And every quarter we used to have internal audits for third-party vendors. And there used to be non-compliances. And of course, it used to go to the board used to shoot all the recommendations. But ultimately what happened, HVAC vendor who was maintaining the HVAC for Target stores got hacked. And through that, the POS systems got hacked. So it's not about retaining the information. It's also, we need to ensure that people who are collaborating with us, who have access to our information, we need to ensure that they're also having the best practices, the technologies, the controls.
I agree. And we're actually seeing in some industries where supply chain organizations are being certified to be a part of the supply chain. And if, depending on their current security posture, there may be commercial benefits if the client feels that they're bringing that level of risk management. So we are seeing that, Manoj.
Yeah, so I'll just add one point, looking at the third parties, if you see the cloud things which has been, very buzzword nowadays. And why cloud thing has come, if you see the customer base for the financial service companies, there is a generational change in the customer base. The young customers have come into the taking the financial services. And there is a change in the consumer behavior. So in order to service this new consumer behaviors or new consumers, the organizations, financial services or companies are going into the new technologies, and in order to provide in a very high speed, they are going into the clouds. So by the fact that they are going to the clouds, they are also sourcing their sensitive data and sensitive personal data as well as sensitive business data into the cloud. So also we need to look at a very holistic approach. Though we may have lots of policies, procedures, we may have implemented lots of technologies, but we also should look at whether we are mature enough to mitigate a cyber threat or to handle a cyber threat. Probably the companies should carry out an exercise on the cyber security maturity assessment and over a period of 2 to 4 years, what is the current level, what should be our next level in a period of 2 years or in a period of next 4 years. We need to conduct that exercise. And next thing is that as a company, we should not only think of to just comply to the ISO 27001 or to PCI DSS or to the regulators, but our main focus or the primary focus should be towards the reducing the risk of the organizations.
I agree. And I think that the comment was made earlier that what is good enough, right? Because most organizations can't go and spend fortunes on the latest next generation SOCs or whatever it might be. So how do you really define enough? And I think that's the challenge with some of the technologies we're seeing is I've seen clients who don't necessarily You didn't see that happen, right? That was... It says, sir, please carry on for 50 more minutes. Hopefully you're okay with that, guys.
Wow, wow.
Yeah. So we're seeing what is good enough. So we've got a few minutes left. I think let's go through the panel and give me your one recommendation for things that either your organization will focus on, or what your recommendation would be for clients moving forward.
Yeah, one, maybe not one, but maybe two. Number one is about getting the right threat intelligence, is very key for any security operations. It holds good for any security, it would be IT or physical or a nation security. So we need to have the best of threat intel, and threat intel depends on the volumes of, the data that's been, sampled. So the quality of threat intel, the velocity of threat intel, depends, largely, will influence the outcome of any security incident. Secondly, I would say about collaboration, how vendors and customers can collaborate to ensure that we share information and we take actions based on those information. To give an example, I think the IBM Cisco, collaboration on sharing threat intel. Absolutely. And cross pollination of intelligence is something that that's an example that we can talk about. So collaboration is the key to ensure that we share all the information across within the community. Perfect. And get the best of.
Thank you, Srikanta. Avez.
I like to be touching on the basics, right? For me, the basic has to be very clear. How many % of the employees in your organization knows about your information security policy? Or I'll just give a live example. How many of you change your organizational passwords every 90 or 60 days? How many of you change your passwords? Guys, please, sports. You have to change, right? Because you're forced to change it. But how many of you have changed your ATM passwords? Do you remember? Do you even remember your Facebook passwords? Right? Because you're not forced to do it. Right? In your house, you don't do, for an example, your son is downloading movies from torrent, right? Your daughter is playing video games, and you have bought a pirated, what? Operating system. Almost 5 years back, people never knew that we have to pay for an operating system because it was always pirated. So it's all about the basics. The basics has to be right. And the top, to add that icing on the security exposure, the antivirus is free. When it expires, you just do what? Refresh. Another company's antivirus. We don't even spend 600 rupees to protect our systems. So it's ultimately, for me, being a risk guy, being a security guy, it has to be the basics. The basics has to be very clear. When we ask our employees, have you ever read the warning that comes first thing when you start your laptop? How many of you have ever read the warning that comes in your laptop? But the first thing about the data security, the companies have said, you should be careful about using it. Nobody does it.
Everyone here.
It's exactly like our nose. It's sitting right in front of our eyes, but we never see it. It's
no,
exactly that way.
I agree.
It's completely ignorance.
But basics are key. Basics are key. Manoj?
Yeah. So, in fact, I told that, most important part is, they have told that collaboration. So inside the organizations, the collaboration between the IT organizations, security organizations, and the business operations is the most important factor in mitigating the cyber threats. And the second aspect, which I told, that we all should look at carrying out a cyber security maturity assessments, along with conducting the security simulations, different type of simulations like red team assessment, blue team assessment, and active threat hunting, like these kind of things we may have to do.
I agree. Thank you, Manoj. And finally, Shiv?
So I think I can say cybersecurity awareness and training is one of the important factors. It's not only in your internal organization, but for the stakeholders, and the social responsibility is also there for your societies, from your government. So cybersecurity training and awareness is very important.
Thank you, Shiv. So listen, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, and just some final thoughts from me. I think we've heard from the team visibility into the infrastructure, what is normal, make sure you have a good baseline of how your infrastructure behaves today. We talked about ongoing testing and just reinforcement. Have I deployed the right technology, the right processes? And then we've talked about user training, user awareness, and finally, incident response. So how ready are we to make sure when we do see that breach, we have the right team, the right processes in place to respond. So thank you all very much for your attention, and we'll close there. Thank you.